Most people spend their careers building value for someone else and never realize that's the real mistake. My guest did exactly that for years. He ran other people's companies, he fixed problems, he scaled operations, he created massive value that he didn't own. He even sold 6 companies by making them transferable and systemized. Then he made the switch most people talk about but never execute. He acquired his own business, pursuing the entrepreneurial path on his terms. In this conversation, we break down how that transition actually happens, how he went from hired operator to owner and eventually built, and we talk about why so many businesses stall at $3-5 million, how founders unknowingly sabotage exits, and why buyers think in decades while operators think in quarters. If you want to stop building value for others and start owning it, this episode matters. Stay with us.
Originally from Kentucky, made my way out to Virginia for school, ended up in Washington, D.C. Basically did consulting for about 10 years with a variety of different companies. And then in 2011, I joined Atlantic Media. I sort of got tired of helping people do things and wanted to start doing things myself, as many consultants do. I joined Atlantic Media in 2011, and they were a media conglomerate, most well known for The Atlantic, which is their major consumer publication, but they had a couple of other sort of more B2B focused brands and information services. Joined them as sort of a vice president of alternative revenue, business development, and analytics. Basically, they sort of wanted me to handle all things revenue that were not advertising and not subscriptions. And when I joined, that was like $400,000 of revenue. It was a very small amount. And in about a year and a half time, grew that to about 8 million in revenue. And it was almost all margin,
Wow.
90% margin, because it was all utilizing assets and work that we were already doing. And that sort of took the business from unprofitable to profitable. They asked me to take over. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, what were the sources of that income?
It was a lot of sources. We were going from sort of an old school analog media company where, our primary means of distribution were magazines and sort of daily outputs in print. And so we were making that digital transition. By the time I joined, they'd made a lot of that digital transition from an audience perspective. And they were beginning to do digital advertising. There were so many other ways. This was, call it 2011.
Yeah.
There were so many other ways to make money. And, I'd like to say that I was brilliant. But honestly, I had the time to meet with everyone. And so I probably had 6 to 8 meetings a day with some external vendor who wanted to sell our media company something. And there had just been no one in the organization that was sort of available to take those meetings. So I had 30 meetings a week with people who all had a different view of the future of the internet, and the future of digital media. And a lot of them, they just wanted a little bit of pixel space on our page. So you give them some pixel space and they give you some revenue. And you do that enough times and it really adds up. There were some big deals in there as well. There were deals with, Facebook and Google. We also had not done a lot of syndication of our back catalog. That turned into a 7-figure opportunity. Put those little referral links that you remember from back in the day that were at the bottom of every web page for a while. That was a 7-figure opportunity. But it was really interesting. I got to, I basically took 30 meetings a week, all with different people who had different views of the future of digital media. I had been in energy consulting before I entered media. And so it gave me a really unique perspective. I sort of absorbed more perspectives on what the changing media landscape would look like than anyone else in the company, because everyone else were doing their day jobs.
Yeah.
So then there was some shifting around in the organization, and I was asked to become the CFO.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a completely different role.
It was, I was, a lot of my consulting prior had been in finance,
Okay.
like in the financial function, and I had my MBA, but I was not really there. But the other part of I was alternative revenue and I was analytics. So I'd also built like a small 3-person sort of business intelligence and analytics team. And I just sort of took that team and applied it to the financial operations of the company. And I had a great controller. So, I didn't need to get nitty gritty into the finance, sort of the accounting side of things. And we were also a privately held company. And so we didn't have, investor or shareholder. We were owned by one family. We didn't have commercial debt. So it was really just sort of business operations finance. So,
Okay.
so a lot of budgeting, holding people accountable. And so it was more the strategic CFO
It's the
model
fun.
rather than the.
It's the fun part of the CFO role.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
it was a lot of fun. The president of the company, who was my boss, quit to go be the CEO of Bloomberg Media, and the owner said he didn't want to rehire a new president, that he was sort of going to drop back in and manage the business. But this is a wealthy entrepreneur who had started and sold many businesses. And so he did drop back in and manage, but it was a little bit, he sort of went from project to project. And then occasionally he would spend the summer in France and so as the CFO, I was sort of like the operational glue between all the business units. Eventually, he came to me and he said, I've met with my children, and they don't want to take over the media business, which I think the owner, I think, is wise of them. It's a very difficult business. And I don't want to be the old white guy who loses touch with reality and runs his business into the ground. So I feel that I'm a steward of these businesses, and I need to find each of them a home. And so I want you to come on a 5-year journey with me to optimize the businesses and eventually sell them all. I explained I'm happy to do that, but I couldn't do that as the CFO. And so we did a little double skip where he made me the COO, and then 6 months later he made me the president of the organization. And so I went from having a lot of CFO soft power to more true hard power. And we had 6 different subordinated business units that were reporting into me. And over the course from my CFO period to our height, we grew the business from about 50 million in revenue and 300 employees to like 160 million in revenue and 1,000 employees.
What lessons will you take with you from going through that process of selling 6 companies? What are the lessons? What would you do eventually down the line if you decide to sell this business that you just bought? What are the lessons that you're going to take with you from there?
Yeah, I think having clean and well-tracked financials. We had a really pretty robust finance and accounting organization in these larger companies, but even then, there was so much mess that occurred in the sales. I think having it very clear, the more that you can talk about, there's a variety of like operational decisions you make with really clean and clear financials. But that also helps any prospective buyer. And if you're going to buy a company and improve it and then sell it for more, then part of what you've got to do is show that you know more about that company than when you bought it. And I think in the lower middle market, where a lot of searchers and acquirers are buying companies, you're buying from founders who they run their financials almost off of gut instinct a lot of times. Like they've been doing it much like those 20-year media veterans. They're like, I know what this should cost, and I know it because I know it. And I just do everything a little bit by the seat of my pants.
Yeah.
And, when they go through a sale process, they can't like document all of that, and
Yeah.
they can't show it. And so I think that's why we can get a little bit of a discount on smaller companies. So I think much more clarity on the financials, unit cost economics, just the way the business functions
Yeah.
is a big thing.
But also when you're running a business, you have so many decisions that you have to make. You're trying to find the 80-20. So where are the 2-3 lines in my P&L that I'm going to look at every time to see if I'm going the right way or the wrong way. And then the next thing is usually, what is my tax exposure and how do I cover for that? And then that's it. They're not trying to, because there are so many other decisions. There are people decisions, client decisions, marketing and sales decisions. So a lot of times, you got to give the seller entrepreneur some grace, because they're running, they're like, in general, they're not planning on selling this business. In general, they don't have like a structured process like you guys did for 5 years. And so in general, that's not how it goes. And then they build, let's say, a habit of running this business a certain way, or having this financial filter for like 30 years. And then it's almost impossible to change behavior, a year, 2 years beyond. So they keep doing, they may change a little bit, but not much. And then for them, it's like clean. Oh, I did all this work to keep them clean, but they're still not that clean.
Well, they're focused on cash flow so often,
Yes.
and not asset value.
Correct.
And I think, cash flow obviously makes a big difference to me.
Yes.
But a lot of the value here is the asset value. It's not in the cash flow that it's going to put in my pocket, on year 1 and year 2 and year 3. It's what is the overall value I'm going to create over 5, 7, 10, 20 years? And hopefully amazing cash flow is part of that, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Yeah.
Well, when you're running a business, cash flow is everything. It's like blood. And so you're as an entrepreneur, like as a business owner, yes, you do want to hold in your head those two things, the short-term survival and the long-term value creation. But, there's so much coming at you every day that long-term value creation it takes a smaller portion of your bandwidth and your mental, like thinking, that all you're thinking about is survival and growth. And even the growth, when we think about growth is about survival. The bigger I am, the more unkillable I am, in a way, you know what I mean? So I'm trying to grow so I don't die. And, and that's where kind of the mindset that is kind of hard to shift, especially when you have done it for so many years. And I'm like, dude, what are we talking about? Like, the focus is over here, and hopefully that business owner has done a good job, creating a strong cash flow in business that when they transition it. And I'm okay with some nonsense in the accounting as long as the business has strong free cash flow.
Yeah. And I also think it's interesting as a business owner gets farther in their journey with their business and closer to an end of that journey, their long-term thinking begins to shrink significantly. And so, they're not making the decision that might help them for 5 years.
Yes.
They're making the decision that's going to help them in the next year. And that can be something you need to look out for when doing a purchase. But at the same time, it's a huge opportunity when you're sort of like, hey, this is a business that has been starved for sort of growth reinvestment. And as long as that starvation has not disadvantaged it in the marketplace, it's a real opportunity for, I'm not a private equity firm that's looking to buy and flip in 3 to 5 years. I bought this thing, I'm 47. I can run this thing for 20 years. Maybe I hand it to my kids. And so I can think with a much longer perspective, and having the experience I had in the past about how to do that value creation, I'm definitely thinking about it on a lot longer time frame. And I'm also a little, I'm in a lucky position where my family and my personal cash flow in the immediate term is a little less relevant.
Yeah.
Some people need to buy a business that's going to pay down the debt and pay their family's living expenses in year one. I'm a little more capable of riding some waves and letting the cash flow of the business simply reinvest in the
Yeah.
business for growth.
Yeah, 100%. And so that part, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say the other thing I would say that I learned from historically that I think is really relevant is don't make yourself an indispensable part of the asset. I ran across all of these businesses, and every time I had to set the business up so that it could transfer without me and that the buyer felt comfortable with that. That was easier with strategic buyers who had, another version of me there. For financial buyers, that was a little bit more difficult. And so as I go into this new business, I don't want to necessarily, I want to learn everything that the founders and the sellers were doing and get up to speed, but I don't want to learn it so that becomes my job.
Correct.
I want to learn it so that I can manage it and hire someone to do it so that my time and effort is always value add to the operations of the business, but not something that has to go along with the new business.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that allows me to focus on growth. And, one of the reasons I made this journey was I saw my old boss, the owner of the media company, he had a Michael Finnegan. And, I want to get to the point where I have my own Michael Finnegan.
Yeah. And also you don't want to be the bottleneck in your business, the bottleneck to the growth of the business. So yeah, absolutely. But going back to a point that you mentioned earlier, like there are situations where the seller, when they get close to the exit, that long-term, short-term, kind of like balance shifts and it becomes more on short-term than long-term. Sometimes that's absolutely true, but sometimes some sellers, some owners have gone through this kind of like cycle of growth over 20, 30 years. And there was a period where they essentially got into growth mode and they said, okay, let's blow this thing up, let's grow this thing. And then they scaled to a place where it got really uncomfortable. And, you see these companies that go from, let's say, $3 million, $4 million revenue where they're profitable to go to like $6-7 million revenue where they're not. And then they have more people. They go from having 12 people to having 30. And then now it's much harder to manage a 30 organization. They haven't crossed that chasm to the 10 million range where they can have more people to manage and they have a better organization. So a lot of times they hit that like 5, 6 and they say, oh, I'm selling more, I'm doing more, and yet I'm making less. I don't like it. So they go back and then they shrink to that 3 million revenue, 2 million revenue. And then it's like, oh, I'm back, I'm making money. I'm comfortable. Let's say 3 million, and then clearing close to, let's say, 1 million, and then I'm good. I'm making $1 million. I have this small team. I don't have to manage too many people. There's not a lot of like incoming. My inbound is way less. It's like 20% of what it was. We're gonna stay right here. We're not gonna make any more effort to grow, and then we're just gonna let the inbound come to us. We don't have to pay for this business and whatever. And then they just run that business like that until they decide, okay, I'm going to retire. I'm going to do something else. And then that's when so by then the business has kind of got used to not having any kind of like growth engine in it. Yeah. And so you come in and it's like, okay, I have this organization that doesn't have any growth, levers, this, that. I have to implement those. But we have to do it with making sure that the service, the product, the team can actually handle that growth and so forth. So then you end up going back to operation, building foundation to the operation first before you can actually start developing the growth. So it is fascinating, kind of like the two, you do get both. You do the guys that go and then they all of a sudden they push the brakes last minute. It's kind of like, it's almost like someone who pushed the brake 10, 20 years ago or 15 years ago, or someone who came full speed and then just pushed the brakes. 2 years prior. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I saw a lot of people who were like that, and the growth was there, but they didn't know how to build structures for growth.
Yeah.
So it required more and more of their time, and they were like, "Look, yeah, I could grow, but I have to work 60 or 70 hours a week, and I don't want to do that when I can work 30 hours a week and put $1 million a week in my pocket."
Yeah.
And I will work 60 or 70 hours a week. I don't want to sign up for that. Like, if I wanted to do that, I wouldn't have left the corporate world.
Yeah.
But I will do that. But the key is I'm going to structure my business in a way that doesn't require me to do that on a regular basis. Like, I'm going to invest in hiring these new people. And I think that's the other hard thing when you say, hey, you need to spend $150,000 to hire this new person to do this, that's coming right out of their pocket.
Yes.
But for me, yeah, it's coming out of my pocket as well. But I have the experience of building and seeing what that can do, and I think that puts me in a different position versus a founder owner.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's just like the tolerance, it's kind of like capacity for change. So when you get to, you built a business over, I don't know, 15 years, and you got to a place where you're netting $1 million, and then now you see that you have to go back making less money and doing more and having more, you have to work harder and make less money to cross that period where you make it to 10 million. It's like, do I really want that? So it's super, super rewarding. It's a much better business, much healthier business, when he gets there. But for you to get there, you have to kind of grind again, and you have to, get through that pain. And a lot of them, just like, I'm too old for this. I don't want to take that ride again. So, it is.
And they don't understand the asset economics. That
yes.
Their subscale business trades at 3x.
Yes.
They get over here,
yep.
This larger thing, it'll trade at 6x.
Yeah.
And so, you might get $500K less a year for a couple of years, but you're going to put $10 million more in your pocket.
Yeah.
That's just not, it's either not something they don't know or something they don't know well enough to truly believe in.
Correct. Both. And then also both. Yeah. And then also, I think when you're coming at it from the perspective of a buyer, that's why I tell everyone, even if you go do a startup, you should think about looking at buying a business. And I tell people, look, learn how to buy a business, because when you learn to buy a business, you understand what is, a valuable business, how to create enterprise value. And those elements that create enterprise value are the elements that make that business, not, a business that you want to keep forever. Those elements are makes a business a healthy business, a good business. So if you go look at it from a buyer perspective, you see the elements, what makes a difference between a good and a bad business, a healthy and unhealthy business. And then you have the element of, aside from the enterprise value, it is part of the enterprise value, but once you get to a certain size, and I mean that 10, 15 million, now it opens up financing opportunities, opens up lending opportunities, opens up, you can get a facility to go buy another 10, 15 million dollars worth of businesses, because now you have this history, you have cash flow, you have all this organization, and so it creates a better opportunity to attract better talent, and it's fascinating, but you have to make that transition, and most of them don't. And so tell us a little bit about the business that you bought. So like, how did you decide, okay, I'm selling all these businesses, now I want to buy a business? What was the thinking there?
Well, oddly enough, initially I had one last business left to sell, and I was talking with my owner, and I was like, what if I bought this business? And actually, it was more expensive, and the strategy would have been a bunch of tuck-ins, sort of in the old private equity model. And so I raised some capital and did a lot of work to sort of go down that path. And then ultimately, at the end, I think my owner decided he didn't want to completely sell out of everything, which was disappointing to me for sure. But at that point, I had the bug. people were like, oh, go be the CEO of Politico or the CEO of Washington Post or Consumer Reports or the president of Reuters or, any number of major brands. And I just didn't want to work for someone else. As much as they were going to pay me, I knew that my value was more. And I had seen that in the process that I had done previously. And also, I sort of wanted something more durable that I could pass on to my children rather than just cash, maybe potentially an operating asset or ideally I've got 3 kids. My thought is I'd like to acquire a variety of businesses and maybe be able to give one to each of my kids down the road. So I think for me, it was wanting to work for myself, wanting to recognize 100% of the value of my own work, and recognizing that I wasn't actually interested in sort of chasing maximal financial reward. Could I have gone and been a private equity portfolio company CEO? Probably. Could I have gone and been the CEO of another media company? Yes, absolutely. Could I probably have made more money in those sorts of things? Yes, I think probably. But I was just tired of working for other people. And I wanted to do something smaller. I had always been interested in businesses. I've always wanted to run my own business. My parents will talk about me talking about that as a kid. And so this seemed like an interesting opportunity. I was able to go sort of part-time as still being the president of the media holding company. So I had some security there, and my boss, the owner, was very supportive of this. He's an entrepreneur. He was like, I think you should be an entrepreneur as well.
Nice.
But for me, I'm not a 0 to 1 guy. I'm that 1 to 10 or 1 to 100 guy. I'm an optimizer. I'm a scaler. And, I just sort of, there were a lot of people talking about buying businesses, and I had a good friend who bought 7 or 8 businesses down in the North Carolina area, and I loved his lifestyle. I loved the value he had created, and so I started looking. I looked a lot, sort of in a haphazard fashion, and found my way to a roofing company that was really interesting, like $2 million in EBITDA. Took it all the way to the finish line. Like fully drafted definitive documents. Had a lease, had the SBA loan secured, and I think we were supposed to sign on a Monday. On the Friday before we were supposed to sign, I got a call from the seller, and he said he didn't want to sell right now, at least. And he was younger. It was a red flag the whole time. He was in his mid-50s. He didn't really have to sell. But I hadn't been running. I'd put all my eggs in that basket. And so that was about a year ago. And then through my YPO connections, I got introduced to you, and I was a little bit down in the dumps. I was trying to figure out if I wanted to, sort of start the process over again. I interviewed for a couple jobs and was so uninterested. There was a big major media company job, and I was on an interview with like 8 of the board members, and it was like an hour and a half interview, and like 30 minutes in, I knew I didn't want the job.
Yeah.
And I should have just stopped the interview right there and be like, you know what, I didn't. I went through the whole thing, but it was very clarifying for me. I was like, I'm not ready to go that route yet. And working with you and the Acquisition Collective, I knew a lot of the things, like, what you were telling me wasn't as much new knowledge for me, but, it was accountability. It's a very lonely process.
Yeah.
And having accountability and turning it into an actual job is important to get traction, because otherwise, I told my family this, I can always put something off until tomorrow. But then I just kept doing that, and I was making these little baby steps forward. And so I attacked it in a much more systematic manner and with a lot more volume. The funny thing is, one of the first companies I got introduced to afterwards is the one that I ultimately ended up acquiring.
Nice.
But I didn't, I kept along with the process with everything else. And it also helped me, I think, feel more comfortable in holding a harder line on the business that I ultimately ended up acquiring, which, there were multiple times where we were at impasse on valuation. I was like, look, I get it. We both like each other. I like your company, but I can't get where you need me to be. And so I was able to say I was going to walk away.
That's such a huge point that you mentioned. So there are two elements. One is having the accountability and being in being in an environment where people are actually talking and sharing and showing their activity. It kind of gets you more pumped up. It gives you more energy being around other people, even if they're buying something else or it's not the same industry. It just keeps you motivated and gives you that cadence of like this in the search. And then the element of like having a system where I'm in the search mode. I have a search system. I have this buy box. I'm looking at all these businesses. I'm pursuing every one of them. I'm talking to every seller. I'm looking at every SIM and asking for financials. And so it just makes you much sharper, much stronger, much more confident, less desperate in a way where, if you see a deal, great, I'd love to pursue it until, it doesn't work. It's either if it works, wonderful, we want to keep going. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I have a pipeline. So I'm like,
there's a lot of people who try and do a search on nights and weekends around their regular job, and they're spending 10 or 15 hours, and they get really fixated. I mean, I've talked to them. They get really fixated on, and I'm like, no, this is a dog, dude.
Yes.
I get that you put a lot of time and effort into it, but it's, you're smelling something funky because there's some shit there.
Yes.
And when you're talking to 15 or 20 companies in a week.
Yep.
When something stinks, you just chuck it out real quick.
Yes. Yeah, you're not.
But that's hard to do if you're not dedicating 40 plus hours a week to it.
100%. But also, I think that it's a mindset in a way, because a lot of times people kind of, what I found, I think from my experience, just having seen a lot of searchers and a lot of buyers in our program, is that a lot of times it's just there's this discomfort around, talking to a lot of people, just like the discomfort around sales. And, the best sales process is this buying a business process, because you have to be comfortable with talking to a lot of brokers and lenders and sellers and talking to them multiple times and pushing. And there's some people are just not comfortable with that. So they do the minimum. And then every time in our group, if someone comes in and that person 2 or 3 weeks in a row, they're mentioning the same business as the only business that they've talked to, I know that this person is gonna have a hard time. But if they're coming and tell us like, oh, I spoke to these 3 businesses, and then the next week there are 3 new ones, and then next week there are 3 new ones, then I'm like, okay, great. That's someone who's taking a lot of reps, and eventually they're gonna land on something. They may even have a good seller in front of them mess it up. It's okay, because it's just another rep. And then they may find out that they messed it up 3 weeks later, and then it might come back, or it may not, but it's okay, because now it's gonna they developed a pattern recognition for like, oh man, I pushed too much on that one. I should have put an LOI, or I took too long. I should have put an LOI, or I was asking for too much information up front. I should have written LOI and then do due diligence later. You know what I mean?
That was a huge learning for me from you all. Is I started writing LOIs after I met with the seller once, or even if it's something lighter than an LOI, like an IOI, but just put something down on paper for them to react to, because no one wants to have that difficult conversation, and then you find yourself 3 months in and you're too far apart from each other in value, and you're like, what did I spend all this time? Like, I understand the business great.
Yeah.
But just get it out early. But it's a tough discussion to have.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so how did you? So let's go to the business now. How did you find this business?
It was, I was doing a lot of work on the listing sites and the brokers. This one was not brokered. It came through a private wealth manager who I had connected with, and was actually helping me secure health insurance policy to secure my SBA loan on the roofing company that I was going to buy. And when that fell through, I'd already secured the life insurance policy, not health insurance, life insurance policy. So I had to go back to him, and he was like, well, I've talked to these other people that are looking to sell. Those were always my best leads, and I had a good pipeline for those. But because I had been, at that point, I'd been searching for 14 or 15 months. So that sort of network proprietary pipeline was active for me. But the problem with that pipeline is you can only move it so quickly. You can't check in with the same people every 2 weeks. Like you check in with them once a quarter or something like that. And so I'm still checking in with those people and still getting leads on other businesses, and that's exciting. And I met with them. I met with one of the two sellers. We had a good meeting.
Well, before you go to the next one, this is a super important point that you just mentioned. The fact that this is a vendor that was gonna sell you life insurance for another business, but you maintained that relationship, and you went back and you told him, and then he just said, "Hey, I have other businesses that I can introduce." You're not even thinking of him as a source of deal flow, but he ends up being a source of deal flow, and it's the weirdest thing because you're I think like the third person that I've spoken to who actually found their deal through a wealth manager. And it's just like it's well known, but very few people actually pursue that path to that channel, if you will. So anyone in our ecosystem, anyone that we talk to, could be a source of deal flow, and it's usually a better source because it's proprietary in a way. There's some trust between that person and the seller. And then there's that transfer of trust because they're going to say a good word for you and so forth. So, and they're not really incentivized. The wealth manager is not incentivized in a transaction like the broker. So if or like a CPA brings a buyer, it's different than when the broker brings a buyer. There's this a little bit more trust.
And they're thinking about retaining business, I think, as well.
Yes.
They're like, if I already sort of know you and you like me, and I know these people and they like me, and I connect you to, then I probably won't lose the business from the selling organization. And there's a good chance. And in this case, I met with him, just before Christmas. I'm going to give him some more. I'm going to do a key man policy on one of my employees. I'm going to do a life insurance policy for me to sort of secure the seller note. And so he's getting business and benefit out of it as well.
Yeah, it's a win-win. And that person becomes an advocate for you in the early days of the deal. And you need all the trust and all the good vibes as you can get in the beginning, so you can start that connection in a good way. But go ahead, continue. So this person introduced you to the sellers. So what is the business? But go ahead.
The business, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. So it's a specialty concrete business that does really high performance concrete. So I say concrete, and people think, oh yeah, I know concrete. You have the big truck and it spins. It spins the concrete, and you go and you pour it somewhere. That's not what this is. This is a very high performance concrete that's like 8 to 10 times stronger than normal concrete. Because of that, it's formed much lighter, much thinner, much finer, much lighter. And it is also structural in nature, but it can, because of that, it's got a real high design element in it. And it's used for a lot of really unique projects and applications, frequently in things that normal concrete could never do, where you might go with steel or something like that. Right now it's largely project based, but I think there's a huge opportunity for it to become more product based. So that's the company.
Nice.
I wasn't necessarily looking for that. I was just looking largely for businesses that I felt I could grow. And I think what's interesting about this one, in sort of the macro industry trends, this is a high growth segment that is going to grow regardless of any other sort of industry or macroeconomic trends or occurrences. And what was nice is even though they've run it and founded it and run it for 20 years, it was hitting a real nice growth spurt the last 5 years, where it was looking at double-digit sort of annual percentage growth. It didn't have a sales or marketing team. It was largely just inbound leads and referrals from other projects. The founders were, wanted to retire, but not really fully retire. So I'm sort of found partners as well. I had purchased it, but we've got arrangements that make them very interested in supporting the business for an ongoing time. And one of the two sellers is actually going to be here around for at least 3 years.
Nice.
I think hopefully more. We work great together, and I think he's really critical to how we can scale it up. So that's the business.
So going back, I want to go back to the point where you said that the business has a growth regardless of what's happening in the economy and so forth. Why is the business? How did you come up with that?
Yeah, and there may be some people who disagree with me. It's because this material was under patent in Europe for a long period of time, and so the company that patented the material grew the business in Europe significantly, but they were worried about letting people use the material who are not well trained on it, who might misuse the material and give it a bad brand name. And so its growth in the US was really stunted for a long time. We were one of the 2 companies in the US that actually had sort of a sub-license on the material. So we've got a lot of history with the material. The material is called UHPC, Ultra High Performance Concrete. The patent is now off and has been expired for a while, but the brand name of the material is now getting a lot more acceptance and awareness in the US. And so if you compare the US market to the Europe market, Europe is like 100 times larger. So I think in that regard, that's sort of where I could see the growth going. But also, it's a difficult material to work with. And so it's not like a bunch of major concrete companies are just, they're going out there and they're pouring, $10 million of foundations and huge pieces of concrete. This is still being worked on in like $500,000 and $1 million projects with really high-end, high-touch clientele. And, your regular Joe concrete company is just a little bit less interested in going through that effort and work to do that. And so I think that's where we have the advantage, and we will continue to be able to grow in that regards without a lot of people coming in. And when you're building, a $250 million, museum of art for, a city, and one of your things is going to be this really unique $1 million concrete facade or structure or something like that, you don't want to go with the person who's like, yeah, this is my first time working with it.
Yeah.
You want to go with someone who's been working with it for 20 years and says, we've done this project, we've done that project. And so I think that history is a huge advantage. And one of the reasons I always said I didn't want to do a project-based company to acquire because of the cyclicality and the ups and downs. But I think this one was really unique in its opportunity. And it was also small enough that I could purchase it without SBA funding or external funding. And I got to a great arrangement with the sellers on seller financing and earnout, so I don't have a lot of debt payments to service. And so if we hit some of those lull periods, it's not gonna crush me the way someone who puts 10% down and 90% SBA loan could go bankrupt. And frankly, why a lot of SBA lenders don't want to lend to those types of businesses anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, those are 2 really good points that you mentioned. The fact that the product has is proven in Europe and has this huge market saturation in Europe, and then but none here in the U.S. And the U.S. is a bigger market, and we're building more than they're building, and it's got this unique design feature that makes the buildings unique and remarkable, and owners or builders are not gonna take the risk because that's the main feature that's going to be a big feature in the building. So you want to make sure that it's nice and it's done right, and just the way it was designed in the first place. And so you don't want to risk it. And then also the fact that the existing concrete guys, that's not what they do. And it's a different business. It's different. So it makes complete sense.
We've got this great story. And I can't go too much into the details, but it was a major hotel that had this really cool facade on it, and they came to us. This was before my time, but they came to us and they asked for a bid on it. And we gave them a bid, and they're like, "Oh, that's really expensive." And so they went to a company that was closer to them that works in concrete, but had never worked in this ultra high performance concrete, and they gave them a bid like half as much, and they were like, "We're going to go with these other people." And we got a call from one of the architects, and they were like, "Look, it's looking like shit. I will pay out of my pocket, my own pocket, for you to do a small mock-up. Can you do this?" We did it. We shipped it to them. They were like, "Boom, we're killing the other company. We're coming back to you." And we tell people that all the time. We're like, "Look, you could go with the cheaper one.
Yeah.
If you want to risk it.
Yeah.
If you want to roll the dice on this major thing, we've been working in this for 20 years. We know what it costs to do it right, and you can count on it." But
yeah, I'm surprised that
that's scary.
Yeah, I'm surprised that the architects are not pushing harder on making sure. Yeah, because like that's your design, that's your thing. I was like, it's gonna look like, I don't want to have that as my project. You know what I mean?
It's this really, what I'm finding is very complex. Is like the architects want us, but then it goes to the contractors who want to bid it out, and the contractors are responsible for making, if the architects were in charge of every decision, every $200 million building would cost $500 million because they do everything. So the contractors play a really critical role in sort of bringing all the pieces together and doing it in budget.
Yeah.
So I get where that goes. So we actually work with the architects to design and build and do everything, but then our contract is with the contractor. And a lot of times the contractors don't understand the material.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Well, I bet I can do this with cast in place concrete, or I can do this with a different type of precast concrete. I know a guy who says he can do this."
Yeah.
And so, it's educating the architects, but it's also educating the contractors. And once you get in good with a contractor, that makes a big difference.
And now
that's why the project is a sort of a virtuous flywheel cycle.
Yeah. And is the contractor incentivized to pick a material that's going to last more than 5 years or so forth, or so how do you overcome? So yeah, we have that first phase where the contractor understands the quality and how it's going to look day one, but then also how it's going to last 5 years over 30 years. So how do you kind of like educate on that?
Good contractors with good firms that have been in business for a long period of time, they know the value of that.
Okay.
So I think you get that right away. Sometimes you've got to explain why this ultra high performance concrete is going to behave that way.
Yeah.
But we tell people a lot of times, like, if this is something that you're willing to replace every 10 years, don't go with us.
Yeah.
But if you're doing something truly unique, and again, a lot of these things are like, things that is gonna sit here for 50 years, or they're gonna hang on a side of a building, and they're like, we can't have this. We can't have it have internal rebar that's going to rust and crack and spall, which is what normal concrete will do.
Yeah.
If you were you're down in Florida, we do a lot of business down in Florida. The conditions down there are hard on building materials. The saltwater air, the heat, the storms, the temperature fluctuations that you even get. I know it's cold down there
right now today.
And so we explain, like, hey, this is going to be there 50, 75, 100 years, and the amount of repairs you're going to have to do on it are very minor. So if you look at total lifetime cost of ownership, that makes a lot of difference. But it needs to be something unique enough. Like if you're just doing some benches out front of your restaurant, we cost like 2, 3, 4 times, depending on what we're doing, what normal concrete costs. Why would you use us? You don't even know if you'll be open 10 years from now. But if you're, a Four Seasons residence or hotel, or you're some major Miami skyscraper that's doing something that's going to be, around for a long time. This is a statement piece. Yeah, you want something that's not going to look like shit in 10 years.
Yeah.
And the architects know that, and I think the developers that ultimately get those jobs, they know that as well. They need to learn a little bit more about ultra high performance concrete, but we don't need to convince them of the value of not using a cheap material.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I mean, because also it's it looks bad on them if the building looks like shit and they're the ones who developed it. So it makes there's complete alignment in terms of picking the high quality provider. So tell us, like, whatever you can tell us about kind of like the flow of the transaction. How did it go? How did it start? Kind of like when sideways, came back, and so forth. Whatever you can share with us and learnings that other buyers can learn from.
Yeah. I think there was a disconnect on right up front on what the profitability of the business was. And not like in any sort of deceptive or manner or anything like that, but they just they showed me financials, and I said, okay, here's how the business should be valued. And they were like, well, I think they had talked to somebody who was like, oh, this is your number, tell us your number. And they were like, here's my number. And they're like, well, it's 6 times that.
Yeah.
And so they were anchored with this very huge number. And I was like, look, it's not 6 times. It's actually like 3 to 4 times. And the number is not the number that you told your random friend at a cocktail party. It's this number. And I wrote up like an 8 or 9 page memo for them shortly after a meeting.
Wow.
That sort of walked through all the valuation. And I was like, look, I'm not saying you can't get this. So you should go and get a number that you feel happy with a person that you feel happy with. But here's how I think about it. And if you are interested in talking to me around this, I can be creative outside of this number or this sort of calculation where we can both share in potential upside going forward. Because I think both of us, some people buy businesses, and it's the roofing company that I was looking at. If I had bought that roofing company and it didn't grow a single lick for 5 or 10 years, it would have been a solid double. I would have been in great shape. I would have put almost $1 million a year into my pocket. And at the end of it, I would have had a fully paid off asset that was worth, 8 figures, low 8 figures. In this one, the value I wasn't willing to pay based on the growth, but both myself and the sellers, because of the pipeline and brand reputation they had built, we both had a lot of belief and enthusiasm for the future growth. But I was like, look, I have to pay on the business that it is today. And if you're willing to get on board with me on that, then we can talk about ways that we can increase that number and value for the future growth that may be there. And they went away for a little while. I mean, we'd had I had a couple meetings with them, but then they went silent for a month or two, and eventually came back and said, hey, we'd like to talk a little bit more. I was like, I'd love to talk. We went a little bit deeper on various structures for how extra value could be created. It began to become clear that we were, and what I'd written before I wrote as an IOI, not an LOI. It began to become clear that we really liked each other, and we began to find sort of a zone of potential agreement. We were getting into details that they were having, I was having to educate them on what networking capital was, and it was getting a little awkward, particularly given the way we were going to structure things going forward was going to be more of a partnership. If you're just going to hand the keys at the day of the transaction, you can beat each other up in the transaction a lot, but that's not what I wanted. It's not what they wanted. And at that point in time, she mentioned that they wanted to engage a broker, not to list it publicly, but to help be the point person on the negotiations with me. Initially, I was a little bit reticent. I was like, so this is going from proprietary to brokered. But they set it up true to their word. They set it up very much like, I think they may have used him to like gut check a couple different things, but they didn't run a process or anything like that. And actually things went much more smoothly when I was negotiating with someone who does deals like this for a living. He was a very good broker. He was savvy, and he also recognized that they brought a buyer to the table. And so, and he'd already seen my memo on value, and he was sort of like, yeah, you're right. And so it was about like, how do we get this? How do he just grease the wheels to get this done?
Deal done, yeah.
It still took longer. It always does. We got hung up with little, the lawyers eventually get involved and they start talking about the 5% worst case scenarios, which is their job. But it puts you in weird positions with each other. But we eventually figured it all out.
But hold on. So you put an IOI, they disappeared, came back, start talking again. You don't have an LOI yet before the broker came in, or you put an LOI? Yeah, you don't have an LOI.
We don't. So the broker comes in. I was like, I can turn this into an LOI. He, what his suggestion was, and I was a little reticent. He was like, let's figure out a bunch of the details. Let's go deeper on the details, and then we'll turn that into the LOI that everyone feels really good about. And then we can move really quickly from there. And his idea was like, let's spend more time getting to an LOI, and then let's go from LOI to close in like 45 days.
Makes sense.
And I, because I had faith that they were not sort of using this as an opportunity to market. I mean, I was still looking at other businesses.
But
I wouldn't.
But I think also the fact that's why I'm not a fan of the IOIs, because sometimes you put an IOI and then the seller kind of has this expectation, that's it, and then you put an LOI, but the LOI, it's also just the start of another negotiation. So, and then they assume that that's it, but no, that's not it. We still have to working capital, have to do the inventory and so forth. So it kind of creates this like false sense of like we're done. But we're not, and so that it makes sense to go from IOI to like a completely negotiated operating like a purchase agreement, if you will, but it's just an LOI terms too. You can create the purchase agreement, and
exactly, it was like an 8-page LOI. That went through all the details of how the earnout would work, and how the future employment agreement would work, and how the seller's note was being paid, and because we had a complex structure, and so we negotiated all there so that the purchase agreement was much more about the reps and warranties and the legal language, and inherently, the lawyers found holes and misunderstandings in our language where we had to go out and fix, but it was a really nice document that we could take over, and as opposed to some of the LOIs I sent out were 2 pages.
But also because the structure of your deal is, like you said, it's a partnership. It is an acquisition, but they're still partners with you and so forth. So it's a little bit more complex. There are a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of stuff going on. So if you go and do an LOI and you have to negotiate all, and then now you have attorneys negotiating all these complex mechanics, and it just ends up costing too much money. So the process you guys did is the right one. Negotiate as much of it on the LOI, and then hand the attorneys a full document. And there are always some little thing here and there that's always happened. Okay, and so how long did that process take? The LOI, the 8-page LOI process. How long did that take?
We probably went 2.5 to 3 months. I was also essentially doing a lot of due diligence during that period as well. Like I was giving them a diligence list. I was meeting with their key materials supplier. I was meeting with their top engineering partner. Where they were saying, hey, this guy's looking at at purchasing the company, and I was like, I want to know what happens here. And so I was meeting even before I met with two of their key employees before the LOI. So it was an LOI negotiation, but also a due diligence period. And that took, I'd say, close to 3 months. During that period, I brought my family down here. We did a long weekend, and my wife and I had dinner with the sellers. My kids came and interviewed toured the facility with the sellers. And it was an opportunity for me to show them, humanize myself even more, and show them like, hey, this is my family is going all in on this. And I think that sort of aspect created the goodwill that allowed us to get through some of the thorny legal reps and warranties issues that sort of always crop up.
Were there any bumps throughout the process? Any times where you felt the deal's gonna die?
Yeah. I mean, what every deal dies 3 times,
Yes.
or something like that.
Yeah.
The QV had a little bit of hair on it.
Okay.
And a lot of it was based on sort of just revenue recognition and things there. And I got a little nervous about. I felt like the pipeline was really good, but when I delved into it a little bit more, I got a little bit nervous that 2026 could be a little light. Those were 2 things. We did a little bit of tweaking to get me a little bit more comfortable. It's tough, I think, to do too much tweaking. What I found in the couple deals that I've done is sellers, once you sort of agree on a price, just because if you're private equity and the Q of E comes back and everybody knows it's a formula, but when it's a seller and you've agreed to buy something for a certain figure, just because the Q of E showed that 2 years ago something wasn't, they're like, well, it doesn't change what I think the value of the business is. And so we had to sort of solve some of those with structure, more than changing value, but we ultimately got comfortable there. And I had to get comfortable with the project-based nature. I talked with not a lot, but a couple people who operate project-based businesses, and had bought project-based businesses. And they were like, yeah, looking at a pure 12-month period or a TTM is a hard way to do this. Like, you might want to look at a trailing 36, and you begin to manage some of those out. And it took me getting comfortable in a couple of those areas. And then there were bumps on time. The purchase agreement, I think when I put it in front of them, and it was 50 pages, or I don't know what it was, they were like, oh my God. When the volume of work that they had to do came on. And I think at one point in time, I was like, look, you're not going to sell this to someone that's not going to have you do this work. It's not worth, I know it's scary. I know you're running a business. And me having had sold while operating businesses, I could create a lot of, I'm sorry, I'm getting a knock here.
Go ahead.
I'm on a call. Yeah. Somebody who I think wants to come interview for a job that I told could swing by, but he never let me know. That's small business.
Yeah, he just showed up. That's fun. That's fun.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
But yeah, so there were bumps. I think the biggest one, it was a small one where I was pushing. We were pushing for a certain close date, and I was like, we're not there. We're not ready. And it was actually on Halloween, and I knew we weren't closing. And we were hosting a Halloween party, and so I sort of was like, yeah, I'm going to go host my Halloween party. I know we're not closing tonight. It's not going to happen. We don't have enough of the information, and I didn't adequately convey that. And I think there was a bit of, but we got past it and we closed 5 days later.
Okay.
But that was a tough spot. It's all about communication, and transparency.
How did the transition go?
It's going well. I've got one seller is doing 6 months, and the other seller is on for 3 years at least. It's going reasonably well. The employees are embracing me a lot. The hardest part for me is so much of everything is in their brains.
Yeah.
And trying to pull it out, and they want to go and just do the work. And sort of do it on the side and then tell me about it. And I'm like, no, I need to see you do it, because you'll tell me about 5 steps, but you actually took 15 steps to do it.
Yeah.
And I need to see all of that. And so that's a little tough managing that. But I'm about 2 months in. They're still largely operating the business. Our general goal is I want to watch them operate for the first 3 months, the person who's leaving, and then for the next 3 months, I want them to watch me operate it. And
Okay.
like sort of, oh, don't do that. Oh, you're about to make a mistake there. But that's how that's how we sort of worked out the transition. And I'm doing a bunch of documenting, a ton of documentation.
Is the person who's leaving, where are they located? Are they located near you?
They are, yeah.
Oh, okay. So you can spend time, so you get to spend a lot of time with them?
I do. I think that they're sort of the business manager side of it, and they've largely worked from home like 4 days a week over the past year or two. And so I'm having them come in, and it's the type of thing we'll work for a little while, and then she's like, okay, I got to get all this stuff done, and I can't do it right here. I got to go home. And so I'm trying to be sensitive. I'm like, letting go. And there's a bunch of stuff I want to do without them here. I want to have, calls and things like that.
Oh, makes sense. And so when you say business manager, like accounting, HR, what is the sales?
Well, some sales. So it was a man and a woman, not a romantic couple, just business partners. He's much more the sort of creative and design expertise. She's the one that sort of you would think of as the typical business operator. So she manages the pipeline, does the invoicing, does the estimating, the billing, does a lot of client relationships. He also manages a lot of the HR. When it comes to like shop operations and strategy, he does that. But when it comes more to like the facility efficiency and sort of cracking the whip and pushing, she's more on that. She does the accounting, the finance, but she's really a great sort of brand advocate. I think that's what she does a lot of, and so that's what I'm really the accounting and finance stuff.
Yeah,
like, I'm not worried
that's
about
easy.
that. I can ex-CFO. I can pick that up. I actually am going to have a fractional CFO come in for a little bit in the new year to help me out, because I've realized that while I can do that, it's not the best use of my time. The thing really is just sort of figuring out how to transition so many of our relationships.
Yes.
And sort of it's like, hey, any email you send, I need to be CC'd on.
Yeah.
Like you should not send an email that I'm not CC'd on. And we're introducing. We didn't come out with like a Michael Finnegan has purchased this company. I'm have been introduced as the president of the company, but we don't necessarily want to spook clients with thinking that there's a big change, particularly given the fact that the creative and design director is going to be here for at least another 3 years. So that's been an interesting aspect of it. A lot of people are like, oh, when are you going to make some big announcement? I'm like,
there's no need for it. There's no need for it.
I don't really see that, eventually it will become clear. But I've even, after the 6 months when she leaves, we've already pre-negotiated a consulting arrangement. So she'll maintain an email address, we'll keep doing some various work. I hope that we'll wind that down over time, but it won't just be like she's gone and I'm here in her place.
And have you met any of the clients, or have you met most of the clients?
I've met a lot of them. And I'm starting, on the new pipeline calls, I'm beginning to take much more of the lead. On the older pipeline calls, I'm more of a listener and sitting by, but I'm doing more of the emailing. We'll have a conversation about what they want estimated or quoted. I'll send the estimate instead of her. I'll try and do the follow-ups. So it's been nice, and I've loved meeting the new clients.
Nice.
It is crazy. I'm looking. You might be able to see behind me. There's a cool building in Miami that we're looking at, but it might not be constructed until 2028. This is how long the sales cycle is, which is a bit daunting at times. But again, if I'm in it for the long haul, it shouldn't matter that much.
Yeah, and then it creates a moat because now you have, yeah, you're ahead of the game, and makes a lot of sense. And so are you? Uh, so you start, look, one thing though you did that was unique. You started getting involved even before you closed. You did a trade show with them and so forth. So that's great. And are you finding that you're like the clients, are they mostly architects, that you're talking to? So the proposals are to the architects or to the developer?
So normally we're upfront, we're talking with the architects about
Okay.
what we can do, about what they want to do. The ultimate contract and estimate a lot of times goes to the contractor.
Got it.
And you could be a 6 to 12 month time difference between when you're doing a lot of problem solving with the architects to when you go to a contractor. And sometimes we do a small project called a design assist up front with the architect, where it's like, yeah, we're gonna, you're gonna pay us 30 grand and we're going to actually dedicate time to helping you think through this. But then you get with and that's wonderful, because once you do that, you're
in. You're in.
You're in.
Yeah.
But then you got to go to the contractor, and you're like, yeah, well, these benches are gonna, because they're so unique, it's gonna be $1 million. And they're like, I thought I had 500,000 earmarked in my budget.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Like when they're bidding for the project, you're not involved. When they set that budget line, you're not really involved in there, and then they come to you after the fact.
Well, hopefully, if we're early enough in the project,
yeah,
they start to know. We'll put it's called a ROM estimate, rough order of magnitude estimate, so that they know generally where we are.
Okay.
And then once all the drawings are, and you're like, okay, is it 1 inch thick or 1.5 inches thick or 2 inches thick, or, and those things change a little bit. Then we can sort of zero in on what that is. And,
got it.
And a lot of times, if we're involved early in the process, we can help value engineer our design to better meet a budget.
Makes sense.
No one likes to tell us what their budgets are, and I get that. No one wants to tell a vendor, but a lot of times we're sort of like, look, I don't want you us doing a bunch of work, designing $1 million thing when you only have $500,000 budget.
Yeah.
And so if we can get that rough order of magnitude estimate out there early, then it allows us to work together to get to a number.
Yeah. Yeah. You put that good, better, best in front of them as soon as possible, so they can make that decision which way they want to go. Yeah, that's fascinating. So now your focus this has been how long that you've closed?
It's 2 months almost.
3 months.
Yeah,
okay.
2 months exactly.
And your focus has been, like, what is your focus split on now?
I think the first month, a lot of it was just learning. In this month, in the second month, I've begun to focus a little bit more on revenue generation, and sort of market awareness building. Had instituted weekly pipeline review sessions. They had no process, and now we've got, weekly thing. Here's who's following up with whom, beginning to do more direct sort of client outreach. I'm doing it a little bit through my network and through people, a little bit less like, hey, I want to sell you some ultra high performance concrete, and more like, hey, I'm now president of this company. I'd love to tell you a little bit about what we do, and could you give me your thoughts on what we should do better, or what you would like to see? Is there anyone else in your network that you think I should talk to that would be interested in this? And then trying to build some systems, some better tracking systems that get profitability. We do these estimates and we send them out, and then the project comes in, and maybe it's 6-12 months later that the project is actually in the shop, and no one looks back at the estimate and says, well, here's what we estimated how much time it should take to do this and this and this. And so then it starts going through the shop, and then they're like, wait, we're over budget.
Yeah.
And so it's about like tying these things together and getting better tracking of really in period project profitability. And so I'm working on a lot of that. And this morning I spent 3 hours putting together our 2026 conference schedule. They typically go to one conference a year. I've got 8 conferences earmarked, and it's like, okay, which ones do we want to try and exhibit at? Which ones do we want to maybe try and speak at? Which ones do I just want to attend? These are great opportunities to like sort of reach out to people. Hey, are you going to be at this conference? Let's set up a meeting. Maybe they're not going to be at the conference, but we can still set up a meeting to meet otherwise. So I want to use those as an opportunity because of the long sales cycle to do a lot of this like relationship building.
And a lot of times
that I can set a vision for where I want us to be 5 to 10 years by seeing some of the other players and how they portray themselves at these conferences.
Yeah, and a lot of times the best thing to do is to have like your own side event within, next to the conference, and invite all the architects and all the people that play in your space, potential clients, potential partners, developer, contractors, and so forth, and just have that
have a cocktail hour or something like that.
Yeah, have that one-on-one time and face-to-face time where you build a deeper connection, deeper relationship, as opposed to just emails flying back and forth and Zoom calls. Yeah, nice. That's awesome. Well, congratulations. This was an awesome journey to watch and observe and witness. And I appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Yeah, thanks, Jay, for all the support and help during it, and the rest of the people in the collective. It's been really great to have people to talk to, so it's not quite as lonely.
Yes, I appreciate it. Thank you, Michael.
All right, thanks.
All right,
Jay.
man. Have a good one.
Talk to you later.
Talk to you. Bye.